I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land from which I at Contemporary Calgary and Shannon Norberg of Norberg Hall currently live, work, and play, as the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all the people who make their homes here in Treaty 7. Corri-Lynn Tetz joins us from her studio in Montreal. It is located on the unceded traditional territory of the Kanekahaga, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many First Nations, including the Kanekahaga of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wanda, the Abenaki, and the Anishinaabe. I'd now make brief introductions to Corri-Lynn Tetz and Shannon Norberg. Corri-Lynn was born in Calgary, Alberta, and now lives and works in Montreal. She studied at Red Deer College, Emily Carr, and most recently graduated from the MFA program at Concordia University. Her work has been featured in the Magenta Foundation's Carte Blanche, a survey of Canadian painting, and in 2012, she was a finalist in the RBC painting competition. Tetz's paintings have been exhibited across Canada, Sweden, and the United States, with acquisitions made by the Senvest Collection and Equity Bank, amongst others. We're extremely excited to hear from you today and get a sneak peek of some of the work that is behind you. Shannon Norberg is the partner and co-director of Norberg Hall. From the gallery's inception in 2010, founded by Jarvis Hall, and continuing over the past decade alongside Norberg, they have re-envisioned the possibilities of what commercial contemporary art galleries can be for artists, collectors, and the vibrant Canadian arts community they value. Their desire for a strong visual culture and passion for gender equity has played an integral part in the shaping of Norberg Hall and its programming. Throughout the years, Norberg Hall has actively supported the practices of emerging mid-career and established artists to foster a deeper understanding of their creative processes, while providing a platform and space to share these critical dialogues. Welcome, Shannon and Corri-Lynn. And with that, I hand it over to the both of you.
Thank you.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good, nice to see you. Thanks, Kanika, and thanks to Contemporary Calgary for hosting this conversation. And thank them for putting on this exhibition of Corri-Lynn's. For those of you that haven't been able to see the exhibition or would like to see it again, it's on until the end of the month. And for those that are from afar, they have a really great digital gallery for those that cannot be here in person to see it. So I'd highly recommend you go and visit it. Corri, I'm going to get into questions with you if that's all right.
Yeah, I think I will maybe set up the slides, the images, and then if we just talk through them. Sound good?
Yeah, for sure.
People have some things to look at.
This will be an easy conversation. I mean, I feel like being invited into the studio is like it's that sanctuary of an artist. So we thank you for having us there. We get to see the works in progress, but also have the inner workings of your mind. Not necessarily how a finished, polished show that's currently on at Contemporary Calgary. So thank you for hosting it there. I wish that I could also be there at the moment, but with the gallery open, and we are thankful for it, I'm doing it from the comforts of my home today. So one of the things, Corri-Lynn, how we go back is that we actually went to school together a number of years ago when we were at Red Deer College. And since I know sort of the background of where you were coming from, growing up in a conservative rural area, how did that impact your relationship to painting and your identity as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot. I've thought about this a lot over the years. I grew up, I did not grow up in Calgary or Edmonton, the big cities. I grew up in really small places. I grew up in Strathmore and I grew up in Red Deer. And the culture, I think, really, you know, um, was very distinct. And I think it affected why I'm an artist and what I'm making. The first thing I would say is that my exposure to painting was through my grandma. You know, she painted kind of in a Western tradition. So she made these paintings of the foothills landscape with mountains and cowboys and horses and cows. And she, you know, when she was young, she was a horse trainer. And so she was kind of obsessed with horses, and she painted this landscape over and over and over again. And it's kind of this, you know, settler utopic vision that she worked and reworked, but she was very serious about it. It was not, you know, she did not take it lightly. She was trying, she had a personal struggle with it. Like she'd always talk about it, like, I can't get this, you know, I can't get this right. I can't get this sky right. I can't get this right. And I think she even quit for a while because she just was so frustrated. But it kind of gave her a space. I remember in her houses, like her whole life was about serving other people and helping other people. She had 6 kids, I think, and a million grandkids, and were cooked at soup kitchens, and you know, but often in her houses she'd have like a little corner of her own, like a room set up with her paints. And I just remember the smell of the paints and the feel of the paints and going in and feeling this pull towards it and not really understanding why. But my first, you know, my first art making was drawing my Barbie horse, or drawing, or like she had stacks of those Western art magazines. I think I should show the next slide right now because it's there. Here's my childhood in a nutshell. So I really wasn't exposed to anything until I went to Red Deer College. And luckily at Red Deer College, I had a teacher who I think is retiring this year. James Trevelyan was my art history teacher, and he taught art history so wonderfully and put life into art history. And that's where I fell in love with painting. And it felt like something that was accessible to me. Going, you know, moving then to Vancouver and going to Emily Carr, where there was a lot more of a conceptual emphasis, I felt a class difference. I felt like I was kind of an interloper into the world of big, like capital A art, and that I didn't really belong there. And I think for me, what it set up is this need to be true to my own experience and to make paintings that are smart but that are accessible. And that's been a real, you know, I think a lot of my work veers into kitsch sometimes and deals a lot with class, especially the ones, you know, where I've been dealing with female sexuality. You know, there's a lot of class performativity in those paintings. And I think it just set it up as an interest for me. The other part I think about growing up in rural Alberta was just from the very beginning, I knew it was okay to be a girl, but it was better to be a boy. I had this feeling, and it just felt like an entire culture that was focused on the activities of boys and men, and that, you know, the emphasis on hockey and on boys sports, and like families would spend all their time and all their money on this boy. And I really felt that as a kid. And so I think I internalized it, and I started really rejecting feminine things. So I didn't want to play with dolls. I thought they were stupid. I wanted to wear a hat. I wanted to go, we would go to rodeos, and I wanted to help my dad in, you know, where he would work. And I wanted to be in the middle of things. And I felt like my growing up, I was constantly pushing against these gender ideals that were like that the society had kind of set up for me. And I think now it's funny because I feel like I am kind of like delving right into everything that is extra feminine, you know, or seen as, you know, cliche girly. Like I want to paint dresses, I want to paint high heels, I want to paint, you know, all of these things that felt like they were, that I had kind of rejected as a kid.
But I think in that you're talking about being down in the dirt. I mean, looking at this picture, but still you're doing that in the studio too, though.
Totally. And that I think is what made me really connect to having a studio practice was, you know, like Virginia Woolf talks about having a room of one's own. And, you know, the women's lives that I saw seemed so boring half the time. Like it was all about taking care of the house, taking care of husbands, taking care of kids. And a studio was a place where I had total autonomy. Like I was in charge. I could keep it in the mess that I wanted to. When you're working with materials, you're building things, you're using your hands, you're seeing results, you're solving problems. And I think that really was an attractive part of becoming an artist for me, was that I could detour that life that I was supposed to lead, you know, that society was telling me to lead. So for sure.
And I've seen you in the studio, so I think about, yeah, being a painter is not necessarily the cleanest medium to work with. So yeah, you're in a smock, you're wearing Crocs, and you're painting these beautiful ornate paintings.
Yeah. And really, you know, and I think of my grandma as like, my grandma was the one woman in my life that was really unconventional, I think, and yet was living this life in service to other people. And so I think the idea of her being a painter I was really drawn to it as a way, as an escape almost, I think, you know. And it certainly is funny, like looking at my subject matter and thinking, you know, about art and about contemporary art, and this kind of, I think there still is a judgment on that anything kind of seen as overtly feminine, or, you know, is maybe less academic and less less of a viable, you know, subject to delve into. And I kind of just want to overdo it. You know, I had a guy, there was yeah, like another student, a guy that I went to grad school with, he came to my thesis show and he said, Corri, what kind of woman painter do you want to be? And I was like, what are you, like, what are you talking about? And I knew what he meant. And I knew he meant, like, you're making girly paintings and you shouldn't be. If you want to be taken seriously, you should not be making girly paintings. And I think it kind of just made me way more resolute, you know, to make the work that I wanted to make and to follow my interests. So yeah.
And would you say that that has something to do with that background too? Because I know that you actually had a very devout Christian upbringing. So
Yeah.
how influential is that in the work that you create today?
For sure, very, very. And I think about this a lot. And I would love to sit down with an analyst or something and have them look at my paintings and talk about growing up very Christian. I mean, Christianity does a whole, you know, number on women when it comes to sexuality and identity. And it's like this training ground. They want to train you to be, you know, I remember going to a Bible study that was called Virtuous Woman. And it was all about becoming a good wife and becoming, you know, all your life should be in service to other people. And so there's a lot of shame put on women, and so many people have experienced this. I mean, same thing with, you know, with anyone outside of the gender binary norms. Christianity, you know, there's a lot of shame, and yeah, so I think that that definitely had an impact and made me more interested in the subject matter. I think the other part of that is that we kind of like, as I grew up, we went to really conservative churches when I was young. And then as I got older, we went to kind of like weirder churches and more, more charismatic, and that were kind of like run by ex-hippies, like there were rock bands and whatever, kind of culty, I would say, a little culty. But those are the places that I actually had like my most devout years were in those places. And I realized that like the way that those churches ran was, it was all about experience and like physical experience. And I thought about this a lot, how you know, people believed that their knowledge of God came through an experience with God, and this idea of sensation. And I've read some master's, you know, theses on this topic, like Pentecostal, they called it a Pentecostal sensorium, where people are, you know, having these physical, you know, things. But anyways, I feel like it put a bias in me towards painting. That painting for me, like after reading The Logic of Sensation by Deleuze, talking about Francis Bacon's paintings, and how paint has the ability to speak directly to the body, and to bypass the mind. So form and paint. And I think for me, the way I want to connect with a viewer is not firstly an intellectual way. I want it to connect, you know, through brush marks and through color, and I want the viewer to have an emotional response. And I feel like there's a connection between that kind of like weird charismatic Christianity and my need to make emotional connections. You know what I mean? It's hard. Yeah.
I do. I mean, which can take us in two different directions. One, either the discussing sort of the process in which you paint, but also the source material in the show. I'm not sure if everyone knows it, but the story of how your brother came across the material, was this large treasure trove of old pornography that was left behind a dumpster, which is really the impetus behind what, sorry?
A Salvation Army bin.
My
so
God.
it's like a donation.
Even better.
Yeah.
That's coming full circle there.
Yes.
But later on, you and I, having constant contact, I remember us discussing it, and you were like, I need more. I'm done with those. I need more. I need more. So more materials, more magazines, but you were specific at that point. You had been after your residency in Banff, and you requested magazines from the 70s and 80s at that point. So does the date matter? And is there that much of a difference in the type of erotic imagery based on the date? And do you feel that that affects you reclaiming the gaze and shifting it too?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my first connection to the magazines was that it was the era of my childhood. So my formative years, you know, I was like born in the 70s. And so 80s stylistically, I can connect with. I remember my aunts wearing certain things and hair being a certain way, and women had pubic hair, and you know, tan lines were very important. Like all of those funny things that kind of make me laugh. I really connected with. And then there was just this weird thing where you're looking at these magazines, and when you get into the 90s, they just start becoming more degrading, and it's more about sex. And the earlier ones felt much less about sex, and I could actually, you know, see the subject in the image instead of just a means to an end for this like male viewer that is going to be looking at this magazine. So there was a cutoff point of like, no, this is just too nasty. I can't look at it, you know. It was almost like the images that I find, it would be that I could imagine this person just doing this on their own, you know, like I could imagine this woman, one of the paintings, like sitting and drinking tea on her couch without her underwear on. You know, it's like a funny thing to me to think of these subjects as completely autonomous and not there. The quote that I showed at the beginning, it's like she's there for herself and not for anyone else. I just want to say this painting was part of my thesis project, and this painting I was really specifically dealing with the idea of spiritual experience, and the show I talked a lot about that and kind of communal experiences and using light. I was really interested in how Renaissance painters used light to kind of signal the presence of the divine. So I wanted to play with that through those images. So there's another one here. And this one's in the show park. I'll just show these quickly and get to the, yeah, so this was one of the first ones that made it, yeah, that I made from those magazines.
From the ones your brother got.
From the, yeah, I made this at the Banff Center, yeah.
It also brings, I mean, in the way in which these pieces are painted. I mean, we talk about the era, the hair, the idea of seeing yourself in this, but the power of the brushstroke is kind of how I think of it. And the way that these are painted is important, specifically the brushstroke and the color. I'm wondering if you think about what your thought on this is and your relationship in the making of the paintings.
Yeah, I mean, I was so hesitant to use these images at first because I didn't know how it would turn out, and I didn't know if it would, you know, just be replicating something that was, you know, yeah, I didn't know. But I felt like in the process of painting and the way that I paint and the brush marks, that it really changed and shifted the focus of the paintings to be about the subject. And I think brush marks for me are, you know, so important. And they are the things that when I have a chance to go to New York and I'm in the Met, I go and sit in the John Singer Sargent room and I just stare at the bottoms of dresses where everything dissipates into these like loose brush marks. And so for me, that's been really, you know, is really a key thing in my painting, is to maintain that, to like, you know, kind of do the first layer. That's always kind of the most exciting layer because it feels like there are events that happen in the first layer and I can see the direction that the painting is going in. And then it's all about following that and laying down brush marks that you can leave and keep alive. And then there's a point that if I overdo it and I, you know, go over it too much, that it deadens the work. So I feel like the brush marks are really key for that. And I think I at Emily Carr, I had Renee Van Helm as a painting instructor, and I owe her a lot for the brush mark because I remember her telling me, be economical with your brush strokes. Like, find the brush that is the width of the area you need, make one mark and leave it. Don't, you know, go in and overdo it. And that really stuck with me. And I think it's kind of developed into a style that that really puts that in the foreground for sure.
Well, and I think that when talking about what's left and what's finished, that's one of those elements that makes them quite ethereal or dreamlike, where myself as a viewer can put myself into that situation. It's in this weird netherworld that you can be part of. And I really think that these pieces, as opposed to the ones that are more communal, that might be a personal thing, and that I can't see myself sitting around with 8 other people naked in a room, or field. But this moment, I'm sure I've had.
Yeah, it's always the focus for me is always about putting in enough detail to satisfy me, and then leaving enough so that there's space for the viewer and there's room for the viewer, and that's always really my focus, and it's a constant negotiating and in the studio, because I don't really plan images out. I don't plan colors out. I'll start with a really high key or very specific color underneath, and then the image changes as I'm making it, and changes, and the source is used very loosely. Often I'll change backgrounds or change, they become quite removed from the original source through painting. So yeah, so it's almost like the source is just an armature for paint for me, and then it's all about the brush stroke and the color, and the thing I think that keeps me motivated in the studio and in painting is that with the brush marks, I really never know what the painting is going to turn out like. I never know. And so it's always a surprise, it's always kind of, there's always a reveal at some point where you've made something that you didn't know, that doesn't exist, hadn't existed, and that you hadn't planned for. So I think for me, that really motivates me.
I think when people walk around the show and they see it, and they see the images and the females that are in this body of work anyways, would you say that this work is for everyone? Is it to represent everyone? And can it?
No, I mean, I feel like the bodies, I feel like I have to paint from my own experience, and my experience has been as, a white woman in a rural, upbringing, all these things. I have to pull from my own experience. I do think, though, it's been interesting for me to talk with people about the ways that people connect with these paintings. And it seems to me that the people that connect with them are anyone who has had to negotiate the kind of societal expectations of femininity, and whether that person is rejecting those expectations or embracing, and the performance of gender. Anyone who's had to negotiate the performance of gender with femininity, I feel like they connect with these paintings. So it's been interesting, like talking with people in the show, and talking with women who connect with it on strange levels. Like, I feel like part of the female gaze, we include ourselves in that gaze. And so, yeah, it's different for men. For men, it's hard. Like, when I was there for the show, the men that would talk to me about the work just wanted to talk about porn, like where the sources came from, or they go right to the way I paint, like the skill level. So, and those two things are less interesting to me than talking with other people with different experiences.
Whoops. That's one of the things that people forget to consider, is that when these photos were originally taken, they were not taken with a woman in mind, not as the viewer, and with a male gaze. So to now see a woman take it, paint it, and impose that female gaze on it really shifts it. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to see both sides of the equation. I get to see it when you're in the process of making it, but I also see it on the other side to see why the collector collects it. And one of the most fascinating things that I have noticed with your work over the past number of years is that it's predominantly women that then collect it. It's not to say that men don't love it and that they don't also, but that there's a shift in that, and that's a shift in collectorship and appreciation and women and autonomy and all of those things, but that it also speaks to women in a different way.
Yeah, definitely. That's been interesting, and it's been interesting to talk to the women that do collect my work. I had an amazing experience meeting a couple in the show when I was in Calgary for the show, and they came to the VIP night, and they were one of the first buyers of this series of work, and they are an older lesbian couple who have lived their lives in Alberta, and they have this painting, and this painting means so much to them and lives in a really prime spot in their house. And it's, you know, it's the woman, it's the blue one with the woman at the mirror and her naked bum. And they feel so proud and so free to be able to have this hanging in their house. And I can only imagine their experience as a gay couple in Alberta, in, you know, rural Alberta. I hope that it's different now. And I know that it's changing, and I know that, you know, I have amazing artist friends and family there that are changing things. But over the, you know, 20 years ago, not only did they not have access to these images at all, but even just access to sexual freedom, or you know, so that to me was like, if someone like my aunt, who also came to the show, who grew up conservative Christian, she was a teenager when I was a kid, and her response to the show was like, she was almost in tears, and she was like, she's like, they're really beautiful paintings, but there's something else, you know. And to me, those are the biggest compliments, is getting to have those conversations and having people respond to the work like that means that the paintings are functioning in the way that I was hoping they would, which is very satisfying. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I said, and quite the shift from your grandmother's work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were no women in my grandmother's work, just cowboys.
When viewers sit with the work, what do you want them to take away from it?
I think I want, you know, there's a sense of humor in these paintings, and I hope people see that. Like, it's part of using these images for me was really about the absurdity of porn and these magazines and the kind of theatrics of seduction and the theatrics of you know, femininity or gender in general. And I think those things are funny, and I feel like kind of working in the gray zone for me of rather than, you know, growing up Christian, it was like, porn is bad, porn is wrong, sexuality is shameful, and, you know, so for me, yeah, I hope people see the humor, and I also hope that they get seduced into the painting by the way it's painted and into the subject, but knowing that there's something going on with the subject that is more than what is apparent, you know. Like, I had a friend a few years ago who's a painter, who's a man, and he's like, I really love your paintings, but I feel like I'm not supposed to. And I kind of love that tension, and I hope people, you know, occasionally do feel that tension with the work, but that in the end they're seduced into the painting regardless.
I was going to say, we are in your studio right now.
Yes, we are.
And there's a lot of work that's in there at the moment. And you, would you say it's is it a new body of work? Is it new,
It's
different
all
material?
it's all work that is being made here. I'll take the presentation off for a minute. It's all work that is being made for a potential show in New York in March. So coming up very soon. Yeah, so I can show you a little bit. They're starting to get bigger, so I'm focusing on making bigger work. I'm also trying to put more, be more, add in kind of references that reference my life or personal experience. The one, sorry, you're probably not getting the right, yeah, these are mirror image anyways, they're not mirrored. So the blue one with the figure, that the paintings behind her is based on a painting that my grandma did. So I'm trying to do little things like that where I'm throwing in, you know, things from my own life and experience. I'll show you these. I have these. So they're bigger.
They're still very seductive, although more of the figure is covered. And
yeah, I'm quite into painting dresses right now, I have to say, fabric. But also kind of making these interventions with the pictorial space, like collaging. I'll maybe make collages, and then in the process of painting, that area becomes something completely different. So I'm playing more with the way it's painted and breaking down the images. This one, again, sorry, you're not getting very good versions of these, but, and then some big ones.
how hard has it been? Because scale was such a thing. I mean, a lot of the works that are at Contemporary Calgary right now, considerably smaller.
Yeah. Yes, scale is a big thing. And I'm realizing I'm having to figure out more ways of, I don't like to pre-plan. Sorry, you see it again. I don't like to pre-plan. And so when you're working on a big canvas, it's more of a risk. Failure is more of a risk because you've, you know, bought this big canvas. So, and I don't have a lot of time to make these paintings. So you know, I'm moving rather quickly. But I do want to make, I was scared to make bigger paintings with this subject matter though, because I wanted them to have a kind of intimate scale and I didn't want them to be a spectacle. But I think the images are changing, so we'll see. For me, it has to be kind of a constant evolution and shifting and changing. I get too bored too easily. I'm not the kind of painter that can pump out 20 paintings that all fit in a very similar mode. I can't do it. I could not do it if I tried. My ADD does not allow for it. I have to be changing, they have to be evolving. And for me right now, you know, the material part of it is really important. And so it's always about, trying to do more, you know?
Well, it's got to be, I mean, I know it's hard to just sort of freestyle with going larger and having to speed yourself up, but also it removes some part of you that just is more intuitive.
Yeah, I mean, some of it has been great because I'm not overthinking and I'm not sabotaging myself. I'm really just like leaving things instead of overdoing it. So I think after this show, I think it will I'll have some time to, you know, kind of take a step back. I haven't really had time since the Contemporary Calgary show to take a step back and really process all that work. That was 3 years of work. Process it and see where I want to go from there. There has been no time to do that. It's just been, the show went up, busy, busy, busy. I'm teaching, and I'm continually making work, but I feel like I need a bit of a, like, let's take a step back, assess, and see, you know, what other directions I want to go into. But it's been exciting. I mean, this has been a very busy year for me, weirdly. Yeah.
I'm just seeing that we have a number of questions that are coming in. Maybe Kanika could come in and help us with these. Too many screens going. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Yeah, thank you both. That was super interesting to get a little bit more insight into your practice. I'm going to, there are a couple of questions. Drew is asking, was there an artist era or movement you studied in your art history education that spurred you on to continue your painting career?
I think, I mean, it changes all the time for sure. When I was first in school, a lot of like Rembrandt and like Dutch masters. As I got older, now I would say, I mean, it shifts around all the time. John Singer Sargent and Manet have been two painters that from the beginning propelled me. Then I got the chance to go to the Musée d'Orsay and just like falling in love with French painting, Bonnard's, you know, getting to see all of that in person, I think was hugely influential. I've never lived in a city where I had, you know, easy daily access to painting. And so that is my goal, is to, you know, at least spend a year somewhere where I can access painting. I'm trying to think of other influences.
Anything else?
I remember Rococo was really like, that was one thing that in art history was like really like, Rococo was ridiculous, don't pay attention to it. And now I'm just like, Fragonard, like like I love it right now, but it was very kind of poo-pooed.
Thanks, Corri-Lynn. There is another comment, really, from Elizabeth Middleton. It's interesting that it's controversial for a woman to make art in your style, while male artists have been doing this for centuries. We are used to girls being artists and interested in cooking, but women are the exception when it comes to professional careers like artists and chefs. And she also adds that she loves your art. So I'll give you a chance to respond to that if you like.
It's funny. It's funny because when I started making these paintings, it's like I could hear. I had so many amazing female painting teachers, and they taught me so much. And they're a different generation of feminism than me. And I could when I started making these paintings, I could feel could feel their voices behind me, just kind of shaking their head like, why are you doing this? Like, what are you doing? And I think it's true. And that almost kind of propelled me forward, because I do think that that male stories in literature, in film, in art, male experience has been prioritized, and feminine experience has been, especially if it's kind of seen as frivolous, you know, has been really regarded as not a worthy subject of inquiry, you know. And I think part of my objective has been to delve right into it and make paintings that some academics might write off, but that most people can see that there's thought behind these images. Yeah.
Okay, we have another question from Stanzi Tooth. What role does fantasy play into these new paintings? There seems to be a different level of invention or moving away the source imagery in these new works?
Yeah, for sure. I spend a lot of time when I find a figure that I want to work with. I spend a lot of time just looking at it and imagining where they should be, and imagining what they should be interacting with, and imagining what could go into the space. And so, yeah, so that I think is part of the fantasy. I'm not great at making up images in my head. It has to be making them on a page. So I'll do some drawings, or yeah, I'll do drawings, I'll do collages, I'll do things like that as a way of sparking invention. Yeah, I think that answers it.
Yeah, thanks, Corri-Lynn. Eugenia Elder writes, "Hi, Corri-Lynn, are you using the magazine images for the emotions of the models or for the actual postures they perform?"
Both. Both. The postures, I think, are sometimes so absurd that I find it fun to paint them. And then the absurdity of this kind of making it making it an emotional moment for the subject when they're in this absurd posture. For sure. I mean, I fell in love with classical painting, the reclining nude. Like those were the paintings that I loved. And, you know, then getting older and feeling like it was a secret shame, like I wasn't allowed to love these paintings. So I definitely am referencing art history with a lot of the poses and postures. Yeah, I think that answers.
Yeah. Question from Billy Ray. A question about your studio process. Behind you, you have several on the go in your studio right now. Do you tend to focus on only one at a time or switch to different pieces often throughout your studio, your studio day?
I have to have a few going. If I just have one going, I'll just beat it to death. So I have to be able to take a step back, and I'm using oil and I'm trying not to use any, dryers. So I have to take a step back and leave it. And I have found that that's a good system that I've set up for myself, because I can take a step back and actually see the painting more clearly when I come back to it. I have that hyper focus thing where I just want to keep working on something and keep going. And so I've set up these little things that kind of force me to move away. So usually at minimum, I have 2, usually 3 going at one time. Yeah. And I recommend it to all my students to always have multiple things going on.
I actually have a follow-up to that. Do you kind of always start as, or think of your work in series and then start a couple of them at a go? Or does it not work like that?
No, I have a hard time kind of coming up with a series. I'm mostly responding to images that I'm finding, or that I'm taking, like if I'm taking photos, and it just goes, from painting to painting, really, based on which I think is a kind of an interesting way to make work right now, because I think we're so inundated with images all the time. And so this painting practice for me is really about how I process images, and somehow, the images that I reach for in the end have connections. Yeah. I mean, usually the source images are from general, similar areas, but yeah, but I don't pre-plan it. I don't I'll kind of have 2 paintings on the go, and then I'll start to think about a third that I would start. And by the time I kind of finish one of them, I have enough of an idea that I can start the next one. So I'm constantly searching, looking for archives, taking photos, while I'm making other paintings. So it's like a, constantly kind of cycling through that.
Charlotte Greenwood asks, how do you classify an academic painting?
For me, it is, for me, I would say paintings that speak to people with knowledge about the context of the painting and the history that it comes from, and is perhaps less accessible for those who don't have that same understanding. Paintings that are, which I love, I love a huge variety of paintings, and I think that I'm saying this, I don't know if I'm right, but I feel like there is a aesthetic that people will assume that something is academic and it's about ideas rather than maybe what I make. I'm not sure. I mean, it's a lot of it is also personal opinion. But that whole thing about accessibility for me is really important. My work, I am reading constantly. My work has a lot of research behind it and thought behind it. And so there is an academic side to my practice. But I would say that the work you do not have to have that knowledge to access the work.
Okay. Gordon Zbromski has put in a comment saying, you referred to the difference between how men and women respond. How are gender queer or gay men in particular responding to your paintings? As a gay man, I found myself looking at technique and composition and seeing the beauty, perhaps the politics, but I couldn't respond with anything like the male gaze that I might have for men, and which causes me to always worry that I'm attracted to paintings of men in a way which is not linked to the painting, but rather the beauty of the man being painted.
Interesting. I mean, I have a lot of gay friends, and they respond to it in a way, in a similar way to that. And I think that they can identify with the subject in a way that straight men cannot. That's been what my friends have told me. They have a connection to the way it's painted, the beauty of it. I think that, I think my non-binary friends, my trans friends can identify, because I feel like at certain points in their lives, they have either rejected or absorbed these ideas of what it is to be, female. And I think that negotiation is complicated, and there's a lot internalized, and I think that they can identify with the subjects. Those are the conversations I've had. So, yeah. I hope that answers your question. I'm also just totally fine if a man sees these paintings and thinks, and has like, thinks they're sexy, that's fine. I wouldn't want to not make these paintings in case that happens. Do you know what I mean? I'm just not prioritizing that opinion about the work.
Yeah, thank you, Gordon, for the question, and Corri-Lynn. Sheila Bannerman asks, hi, and thank you for the webinar. I wonder if you could speak a bit of how you title your paintings. I was intrigued that they seem to draw the attention away from the figures and perhaps challenge the viewer on how they might be looking at the paintings.
I think that the paintings are kind of, I had this conversation with my students the other day. The paintings can be a little bit dramatic in the color or the posture or the dress or, different aspects of it, that I like to keep the titles very blunt. And so the kind of poetry lies in the image. I would love, I'm constantly writing down when I'm reading a book, I'm writing down prose that I really love, and thinking, oh, this would be a great title for a painting. And I just can't put those titles to these paintings. I can't make it, I can't give them poetic titles. And so I end up calling them things like chair or cat, or, you know, really kind of banal things to kind of contradict the maybe overly kind of beautiful or exaggerated, you know, posture. So yeah, that's, yeah.
Everett Tates asks, as classical painting was dominated by the male master painter and Renaissance subjects were mostly portrayed through the male gaze, do you find an intersection between the subject you are reappropriating along with the style of your approach?
Can you read that again? I was just so excited that it was from my brother.
Sure. As classical painting was dominated by the male master painter and Renaissance subjects were mostly portrayed through the male gaze, do you find an intersection between the subject you are reappropriating along with the style of your approach?
Yes, I don't know how to answer that. I think the quote that I put at the beginning, I mean, my whole interest in this work has been shifting the gaze, and how the assumption in conversations about painting for so long, it's changing now, but has always been this discussion that the artist is a man, the subject is whatever he wants, and the critic is also a man, the viewer is a man. And those were the experiences that were prioritized. And I think for me, I'm interested in me as a woman looking at these images, you know, as I can relate to the subject matter of these images, and then also prioritizing the viewer as women and the critics as women, like making that my target audience, instead of the assumption that it is, you know, for men. So flipping that gaze, I think for me has been a really rewarding part of making these paintings, because the, you know, the history and the conversations have all been based on established assumptions. So yeah, I think I'm answering your question, Ev. You can call me after if I if you need more info.
We have a couple of more questions. Rachel Skillig is asking, I would have assumed that paintings based on porn would be more sexual and showing more genitalia. Is this something you have chosen to omit?
A lot of the ones that are showing genitalia did not make the show. They've already been sold, or but yeah, they featured prominently in a lot of the early work. I'm again, like, the sources that I'm using are from a certain time in those magazines, an earlier time. I have had arguments with my partner who says that's not considered porn, that shouldn't be called porn. And so, you know, it's more kind of glamour boudoir photos. I have no problem showing painting genitalia. It's, yeah, there's usually more in the shows. There was less in the Contemporary Calgary show, for sure. I think one thing to add to that is I really like this idea of the figure as hiding and revealing, and the kind of subject is like maybe hiding parts for themselves and revealing other parts to the viewer.
Yeah, Charlotte Greenberg has also posted a comment in the chat that's kind of referencing that question regarding academia. I find your work is a bridge between academic work and accessible work. There is a concept behind your work, and yet it remains accessible to a wide range of people.
That's great. That's my goal. That's my goal. I put a lot into, I've gone to school for a long time, a lot of years. And I do, you know, I'm researching, I'm reading, and I do want that to come out in the work. I don't want it to dominate the work. So, you know, I want to be able to have a conversation with my aunt about the paintings I'm making. I want to be able to have a conversation with my mom about the paintings I'm making. So that's a great compliment to hear. Thank you.
A few last questions. Torben Anderson is asking, what is drawing you now to Fragonard?
Oh, just the frivolity that was like, it was taught to me as like just this frivolous, you know, over stylized, feminine, you know, time period in painting. And I kind of love just the exaggerated notions of femininity, the flowers and the, you know, the girl on the swing and these figures. Yeah, just kind of so over the top that I find it really interesting. And I find it interesting that it was so rejected, you know, in so many ways by, you know, modern art history teachers and scholars, that it was rejected as a just a frivolous time period in painting, that those paintings are not worthy of interrogation or inquiry.
Yeah, I have a closing question for actually the both of you. I find it quite interesting that in many ways you both kind of reclaim a certain space for the woman and for more gender equitable representation. So I'm just interested in understanding from Shannon, you, why Corri-Lynn's practice works within your roster of gallery artists and how that features in as part of your gallery representation of artists. And for Corri-Lynn, what works for you in terms of, you know, being part of Norberg Hall and their wonderful list of artists. Yeah.
Thanks, Kanika. I don't know if I have a proper answer for it, but I just recall that Corri-Lynn was one of the first artists that I was able to reach out to when I first started working at the gallery before I was a partner. And she showed the potential and skill even then. And then just, I mean, women take up or we should take up a larger part of the equation and what is seen and heard and collected, and deserving of that time. That is not just women, that is a large spectrum of people should. But Corri-Lynn's in particular, the work speaks for itself. I really can't say much more about that. I think she's brilliant, and I'm just very honored to work with her.
No, I completely agree. Absolutely brilliant. We're thrilled to have the show up at Contemporary Calgary. Yeah, thanks, Shannon.
Yeah, I mean, Shannon and Jarvis have been so supportive from the beginning, you know, from the first time they showed me and we met up. And I really like dealing with women gallerists, and I find that there's not, that you guys have been okay with my subject matter from the very beginning, and where other gallerists would maybe try and push me in other directions, you've been supportive of what I have been doing, and that has meant the world to me. And also, I trust you guys. I trust you. I trust, you know, I trust the direction you're heading. I feel very proud to be part of a gallery that has mandated equal representation and that is actively working to diversify their roster. And I think that, you know, that we all need to hold the people we work with accountable for that. So I trust their decisions moving forward and value their support has been invaluable to me. And I would not be here with this show without their support and belief in what I can do. So it's been huge.
Thank you. I wouldn't be here without you either, just so it's known.
You actually would not be here without me.
Well, thank you both. This has been incredibly special, and yeah, we hope this relationship continues. And we've put a couple of things in the chat box for our audiences who have joined us today. Thank you all for taking the time out Friday afternoon. We will have a recording of this available for everyone shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Go see the show.
Thanks for coming, Mom.